Greetings everyone, I'm Hoodie Angel Brandon. Today, to celebrate the return of Xander in Fire Emblem Heroes, I thought I'd take the opportunity to show off my build for him, explaining what I think works for him, and hopefully helping players who are getting him for the first time have an idea of what works well on him. But first, a little backstory. When the game first launched, I was quite disappointed to find that Xander, one of my favorites, wasn't available in the summoning pool, despite being in the game, as well as being featured prominently in the initial trailer. Fast forward a bit to when we find he's going to be a Grand Hero Battle character. I was super excited to see that he'd be available, and immediately began saving feathers in anticipation. As a free-to-play player, this was both a blessing and a curse. At the time, I hadn't managed to pull many of my favorites. Leo, Camilla, and others hadn't found their way into my roster. So getting one of my favorites practically for free was amazing. No worrying about dealing with the gacha system and pouring hundreds of orbs without getting him. Camilla. And the fact he looked to be a very solid unit meant that with investment, I could have a great unit worthy of being next in line to the Nohrian throne. On the other hand, Grand Hero Battle units do have their limitations. With limited copies, he'd have a definite ceiling versus other units. While we'd get copies from Grand Hero Battle revivals, it would take a long time to come around, so a plus 10 would be a very distant goal. Seriously, look how long it took to get his first repeat. Further, as with other units obtained outside of summoning, his stats are neutral. While this is better than getting a bad stat spread, it does limit him a bit in terms of options. I'm not sure what stats he'd actually want increased and decreased, but I think I'd personally go with plus attack or res and minus speed. Of course, that's hypothetical, as we're unlikely to see a way to make him anything other than neutral anytime soon. Despite these limitations, I was determined to make the most of Xander, and he's since become one of my go-to units for clearing the game's content. I wanted to finally show him off, so without further ado, here's the build. First are his supports. Up until recently, he had the summoner support, because he's just the best big brother I could ask for. In Fates, when he called me Little Prince and told me to come home to Nohr, I legit cried a bit. Actually, the real reason is the strategic stat buffs. I only just a bit ago changed it to Camilla, but Xander still makes great use of it. If you're willing to give it to him, I highly recommend it. I wanted to use my summoner support for characters I actually really like. The only other units I'd personally consider for the support are Camilla, Takumi, Klein, Leo, and Soleil, and if ever released, Caden, Selkie, and Female Morgan. But Xander really appreciates everything it gives besides speed, so he makes better use of it than, say, Klein, who won't be using the HP, defense, or res all that much. Being a tank with distant counter, Xander makes great use of all the stats. Camilla actually using speed makes her a slightly better choice for me personally, but I can attest that Xander makes great use of the stats. Speaking of Camilla, his partner support is her for now, and no, it's not like that. Anyone who sticks by him would work well. He really just wants the extra stats. Camilla is great though, as she has the res to sponge blue mages that would give him trouble, especially since my particular Camilla is a distant counter build, letting her laugh at the Reinhardt. On the flip side, Xander has no problem taking out archers who give her a bit of trouble. But if the thought of my obviously platonic pairing is still just a bit squicky for you, there are plenty of other options for his partners. The first two that come to mind would be the Reinhardt and Brave Limp, as they can charge an enemy and then have Xander move them to safety and tank hits. Or Cecilia, who can tank blue similar to Camilla with a Tri-Adept Gron Raven build. These three also get bonus points for being horses, making them great options for a horse emblem core with Xander. On that note, Gunthra could also work, and provide a nice bonus to his res in the right season, if you want to play with blessings. Though I don't have her, so I can't say for sure that it actually works as well in practice as it sounds on paper. Healers can also be great, as they improve his tanking capabilities. Of particular note is actually his little sister Elise. Again, totally platonic. He also appreciates buffs to his defense and res, so any horse unit carrying Fortify or Ward Cavalry or anyone with their generic non-movement restricted equivalents help too. Of special note, with the Drive Defense Seal and Soleil and Leon both being 4 stars with Drive Res, you could reasonably set up anyone with a free C and S slot to be a dual buffer for him. Now let's move into the actual skills. Siegfried as his weapon is obvious. Though Wodao plus Ignis would be hilarious, Siegfried just works best. Its innate distant counter lets him work well as a baiter. Arrows and daggers bounce off of him, though when it comes to magical attacks, he's not quite as good as his fellow distant counter sword lords Ryoma and Ike, who have better speed and resistance. Still, there are ways to patch that, as you can see over here, but we'll get to that in time. And Xander also has access to horse buffs. While those first two may be stronger standalone units, I think Xander has a higher ceiling to do what he does best, which is tank. The only comparable units that have distant counter built into their weapons and have access to emblem buffs in that regard are Black Knight, Zelgius, and Camus. Camus is a lance unit though, so they deal with different things and would actually probably be pretty great partners, with Xander covering greens for him. Black Knight and Zelgius on the other hand have armor buffs and higher base stat totals, but trade movement for it. While I joke that Xander doesn't need movement to do his job, it does give him an edge in some situations, letting him rescue an ally. Also, Xander is more defensive while Black Knight and Zelgius have more offensive capabilities. Strictly speaking, between them, Black Knight and Zelgius are probably the better distant counter sword wielders, but that doesn't make Xander a slouch by any means. While we're comparing, Xander often gets written off compared to the newly buffed Eldigan and Sigurd when it comes to tanky sword cavalry. While they're both powerful, I wouldn't say they're necessarily better than Xander, as while they're all tanky sword cavalry, they all have slightly different niches. Xander's is being able to counterattack at range, which if the other two want to do, means giving up their A slots, which means giving up some useful skills. Personally, I prefer Xander for 2 reasons. First is my obvious bias for the character. But the second and much more relevant reason is I just don't like tanking hits if I'm not attacking back in return. It just leaves too many options for the opponent to reposition the unit that attacked me out of danger or dance them and finish my unit off. With that in mind, you'll see that the rest of my build is tailored to taking advantage of Siegfried, which is in my opinion the thing that makes Xander most unique compared to other sword cavalry units. For his assist skill, Reposition is the standard choice. It lets him fling an ally like Reinhardt or Camilla into the enemy to take out a key threat, or rescue them from danger and put himself on the front lines. Swap works similarly, particularly if you're worried about maps with limited space, but I think Reposition is just a bit more versatile. As with most everything else, it really just comes down to player preference. For his special, I have Ignis. While some prefer Bonfire, I've tried both and find I like Ignis better on him. What it comes down to is timing. Thanks to his low speed, he's often doubled, and with quick riposte, he doubles back. If the enemy initiates, you counter, they attack, Bonfire is charged, and you counter back. Then chances are you used your Bonfire on an enemy that was already weakened to the point of being in kill range. Conversely, with Ignis, it won't be charged until after the last attack. That leaves it available to take out another unit when your turn comes around, or on any foe foolish enough to attack him with it charged. Sometimes a foe will live after 2 attacks where Bonfire would have killed them, but it's easy enough to clean up on the following turn with an ally. The bump in damage over Bonfire is nice too, letting him actually take out some spear units. It's totally preference though, as Bonfire is still a fantastic choice for him, and combined with quick riposte, you don't have to worry about a dancer with Wings of Mercy swooping in. Both do have their merits, I just happen to like Ignis a little bit more. Finally, for the slots that most players will actually have variance in, first for his A slot is distant defense. Xander has enough defense to perform his role of baiting melee units, however with Siegfried he can also bait ranged units, though his resistance is quite lacking. An extra 6 points to his defenses when attacked by a ranged threat helps with this immensely. Already bows and daggers barely hurt, but now they just tickle his armor. The added res lets him bait some mages too. Well, obviously he won't want to be parked in front of a blue mage, he can now take some unbuffed reds and greens. While some people swear by Fury, I never liked the idea of it on our calm and cool-headed prince. The extra boost to all stats is nice and improves his tanking a bit, but the loss of HP can hurt him since there are a lot of times where he'd take less than 6 damage from an attack. Further, it conflicts with most his good B-slot options outside of Renewal and Vantage. It works well enough since most people don't have a Celica or Rajat to feed him, given Celica is a fantastic unit in her own right, and Rajat is no slouch either, but I want nothing but the best for my big brother, so I fed my only Celica to him. Other options similar to Distant Defense to improve his mage tanking capabilities and maximize Siegfried use would be Water Boost with Summoner support for the HP bonus or Warding Stance. The first really wants that HP boost from Summoner support to trigger it reliably, and Warding Stance is currently exclusive to Halloween Sakura, making it a rather rare skill. Both could work, but Distant Defense is really best all around thanks to not requiring HP thresholds, Summoner support, and also affecting physical bulk from ranged threats, though that's not as important. Quick Riposte is the standard B-slot option for him. Xander has low speed, which this patches up nicely, letting him heavily damage or outright kill units foolish enough to initiate on him. He actually does want to be doubled though to charge his special, particularly if it's Ignis. So breaker skills which prevent the enemy from doubling aren't as good of a choice, though still viable. Vantage is another option, particularly for Fury builds, though Xander's attack is a wee bit lacking to reliably kill foes in one shots, making it a little more dangerous when his health is dipping. The bump from Quick Riposte 2 to Quick Riposte 3 is rather small, so Quick Riposte 2 works fine as a budget option. With that said, his defenses are so good that with level 3, I've had it trigger 3 to 4 times in a single battle, letting him tank a whole team. With Quick Riposte 2, it'd usually last 1 to 2 times. Not huge, but it's been worth the 20,000 feathers in my opinion, if you want to really invest in Xander. And I really wanted the fancy gold border around the skill, it looks nicer. It also slightly improves his weight in arena, so that's nice. The other options I've considered for the B slot are Wrath, Guard, and Renewal. Wrath could be cute to secure kills, but most things aren't standing after an Ignis coming from him, so it's a bit redundant. Guard could be nifty to prevent an enemy from charging up their special and killing him through his defenses, but getting that extra round of combat with Quick Riposte is really important still. Renewal could improve his sustainability, but again, it doesn't help Xander actually kill the enemies he's tanking. Those could all be fun if you want to run Quick Riposte as his Sacred Seal, but I feel like more units actually want Quick Riposte as a seal so they can run a different B slot than Xander, and Xander has a lot of better options for his seal, so Quick Riposte is best here. For his C slot, it's flexible as is the case with most units. My personal pick though is Attack Smoke. It's very flexible as it triggers when he initiates or is initiated on. Lowering the surrounding enemy's attack by a whopping 7 is great, especially since it affects any units in a 2-space range and affects magic and melee units alike. Weakening his enemies by 7 points is essentially a pseudo buff to both his defense and res, but also can help any allies that would take damage survive a hit as well. Finally, thanks to working on either phase of the battle, you can either charge in and attack a unit to proc it and weaken their surrounding allies, or reposition an ally out of harm and wait for the first attack, then watch as everyone else's attack drops. Unfortunately, it doesn't affect the unit you actually fight in combat, so it does have its weaknesses, and a lot of people don't want to sack a Brave Lyn for it, which is understandable. So fortunately, there are a lot of other options. Obviously, if you're running him in Horse Emblem, any horse buff is great here. But he's especially great for carrying Hone Cavalry for other units, as they'd rather have that attack and speed boost, and he would rather be getting defensive buffs anyways. Threatened skills let him soften an enemy and work well since he's usually on the front lines anyway, and in particular Threaten Attack can work as a pseudo attack smoke if you're on a budget, though not near as powerful. Buffs are great as always, really just don't use ploys on him and you're probably good. His out of battle res is nowhere near high enough to use them. Technically his HP is actually respectable enough that with summoner support you could get by with Panic Ploy, but the other ploy skills would be wasted on him. I also personally wouldn't bother with Breath of Life or Savage Blow. Aside from the fact I don't care for those skills in the first place, they only work when the unit initiates. If it was during any combat, I could see a combo where you reposition a hurt ally out of danger and take a hit to either heal them or damage surrounding enemies respectively, but they don't work like that, so meh. And Xander is a defense-oriented unit, so skills that require initiation are kind of wasted here anyway. Finally, for the Sacred Seal, distance defense actually stacks with itself, further improving his ability to bait at range. Plus 12 to res is just insane, and puts him around an actually respectable 29 res in battle before factoring in any buffs or merges. That also helps him sustain versus the newly buffed Felicia, who's probably the only dagger he's really afraid of at the moment. Prior to that, I've run both the HP boosting seal and Hardy Bearing, which both worked well. In particular, Hardy Bearing let him not fear Desperation Mages or Vantage from the likes of Ryoma, Ike, or Hector. But the HP requirement made it a bit too situational, and by the time the Sacred Seal Forge was out, distance defense had already come out as a Sacred Seal, rendering it pretty obsolete. And once distance defense did come out, I gave it to Xander, and he's been using that pretty much exclusively. Other options if someone else is using your distance defense seal though, would be the aforementioned Quick Riposte and Attack Smoke, as well as any of the various Res plus 3 seals that could function as a budget distance defense. You could also try Close Defense in his seal and or in his A slot, which would improve his ability to tank melee units and also Manicheets, though he really probably shouldn't be fighting those anyway. That also makes Siegfried pretty much useful for only arrows and daggers, effectively wasting one of his best assets. So that's my Xander build, and some other options for those of you who don't want to invest as heavily into the future Nohrian King. Personally, I think the double distance defense, Quick Riposte build is Xander's best for making him solid at fulfilling his own niche of being a distant counter sword cavalry, and differentiates him from other similarly tanky units. It actually gives him a surprisingly good amount of res, and his physical range defense gets to some hilarious levels. While changes to the game have given him a lot more competition among mounted red units, Xander still shouldn't be slept on. Thanks as always for watching. Let me know if you enjoyed this and if you would like to see some more units. Xander is the character I know the best, but it's always fun to just see what people are building, so I'd be more than happy to show off some of my other units, like my Camelot, and explain the reasoning behind some of the build choices. Until next time, this is Little Prince, Hoodie Angel Brandon, signing out.